All right, Nick, let's talk about the Nebraska Cornhuskers. Year one of Dylan Raiola's tenure was good. There was a lot to like, a lot to see, but I think things are about to get a whole lot better. And this latest update, I think, will get Cornhuskers fans even more excited. You're going to love what you're hearing here. But before we get into that, I'm Andrew, that's Nick, and this is Saturday Morning Inspection. All right, Nick, as I alluded to, interesting update here about where Dylan Raiola is and his development with the team, what they're going to do in year two. And I think there's a little bit more to cover as far as why you can get excited about the offense once again. So maybe strong bonds growing, good things going forward for this Cornhusker team. Let's get into this first article and then we'll talk more about it on the other side. This is over on SI.com. It says, as he enters his sophomore season, Raiola's growth and development has been a focal point for the Cornhuskers coaching staff. Co-offensive coordinator and quarterbacks coach Glenn Thomas recently spoke about Raiola's progress, emphasizing the benefits of having a full year of experience under his belt. Says, obviously a year passed and he's just in a different stage in his process at this point, Thomas said. There's a familiarity with what's happening around him, so we're super excited about that, and it allows him to maybe grow in some other areas like that. I think he's in a great place, excited about his humility, his excitement, and his intensity. They expect all of those things to be better, and I think all of those are in a really great place right now. So it seems like Dylan Raiola he's doing a lot of really good stuff. He's coming into year two, approaching it with a different demeanor. But why exactly would he do something like that? What is going on to make Raiola excited now? Is there some new additions on this team that he likes? Is there something to get him excited about what the offense is to bring going forward? And I think resoundingly, that's a big yes, because you see what the Cornhuskers did this offseason. They brought in a lot of new additions to the wide receiver room. I think there's been a lot of great guys. Some, younger guys have been impressing. There's been a lot of, veterans that have stepped up. But one guy in particular, Dane Key, has been a big addition, and Dylan Raiola has seemed to really like them. When talked about the receiver groups, and Key especially, he said something I think is really interesting. He's like, it's like a car guy that loves cars, Raiola said. It's like Ferraris and Lamborghinis and all of those kind of cars. Talking about his wide receiver room now. It's a blessing, honestly, to look out there, look right and left, and now you have multiple options to look at, and it's going to be a lot of fun. Specifically talks about Dane Key and then goes on to talk about how hard he personally worked to get Dane Key to come to Nebraska. And Dane Key actually talks about that as well, just saying that why he wanted to come to Nebraska was the bond that he built with Dylan Raiola over them talking over the weeks and months before he decided to transfer, and just how hard Dylan worked and how great of a quarterback he is. So I think that's the key here. Dylan Raiola now has a wide receiver room that he can be excited about. He now has a number one wide receiver in Dane Key that he has a great relationship with and that he can trust on and just have this team going forward. It's great when you work towards something and it comes to fruition. You're able to get Dane Key to come over, and now you can run an explosive offense where you have playmakers. So I think that's the overarching thing. Yes, Dylan Raiola is in year two. Yes, he's in a better place developmentally. Obviously, year one to year two, you're always going to make a little bit of a jump. Then you start to slow down. You're starting to see everything come together on the field. But the fact that he now has a wide receiver room and one guy in particular, Dane Key, that he can trust and that he gets excited about, I think we're going to see a masterclass difference in year one to year two. I think this Nebraska offense is going to be much more explosive, much more fiery, and we're going to see Dylan Raiola making some big-time plays out on the field. All right, Nick, that's enough of what I think about all of this. I'm curious what your thoughts are, but before we get to you, Cornhuskers fans, in the comment section below, let us know. What do you like about, Dylan Raiola and this wide receiver group? Is there someone that really stands out to you more than Dane Key? Is it Dane Key? Is that number one guy? Let us know who is the most exciting receiver out of this new bunch of weapons that Dylan Raiola has acquired in the comment section below. But nonetheless, Nick, what do you think about this latest out of Omaha?
Well, I think Dane Key is obviously a very important addition, and getting him on the same page as Raiola is critically important. Dane Key was a pretty consistent, 38, high 30s to high 40s receiver every year. His 3 years with Kentucky, even his freshman season. So he's been very consistent, steady performer, reliable target. And look, Kentucky, to be totally honest, are a good team, but they're far from an SEC powerhouse. So anytime you put up even decent numbers at a program like SEC, when you're going up against, frankly, 9 times out of 10 better competition, is usually an indicator of a pretty good player. He's got good size. He's a vet. Seems to be a good leader, great fit. So Dane Key is going to do big things for Nebraska and Dylan Raiola in 2025. I see that 100%. And the Nebraska Cornhuskers obviously need it because their receiving core was, for lack of a better word, not very good last year, right? They needed a lot of help. They went out and got it in a number of guys, and I think Dane Key is going to be the headliner on that list. And it's one of the reasons why you bring in a veteran, by the way, a guy who's played 3 years of SEC football to work with the young Dylan Raiola, so Raiola doesn't have to, try and become a better quarterback while working with the receiver who's still learning to run routes and timing all that. Key's a vet. He's been there before. He can kind of be sort of the not necessarily the big brother mindset, but the same kind of thought where Raiola doesn't have to worry about Key. He knows Key knows what he's doing. He only has to worry about himself or maybe some of the other younger receivers. But kind of circling back to Raiola, I think one of the things that's very interesting is that people kind of forgot about him and his performance as a freshman, especially when we consider the issues they had at the wide receiver position. So I went back and I compared, and I was just pulling up the stats here just to make sure I had everything correctly, comparing him with DJ Lagway, the freshman quarterback, big name quarterback, very similar kind of concept, the Florida Gators last season, right? And people say Lagway's great. He's on an incredible trajectory. Looks like a future Heisman guy. Gets about 10,000 times more hype right now than Dylan Raiola. But when you look at their numbers, what's very interesting is that Raiola is not far behind, in a lot of cases, even better than DJ Lagway. So if you look at Lagway's numbers in 12 games last year, he completed 60% of his passes. If you look at Raiola in 13 games, he completed 67% of his passes. Okay, much higher completion percentage. How about in 12 games, Lagway threw for 1,900 yards. In 13 games, Raiola threw for 2,800 yards. Massive delta there. You don't throw for 900 more yards in one game. So obviously, on a per game basis, on a volume basis, Raiola had a lot more asked of him and did a lot more with it. In terms of touchdowns, Lagway had 12 and Raiola had 13, so about the same there. Interceptions, Lagway slight edge on Raiola, 9 versus 13 from Raiola. So I'm sorry, 11 from Raiola. So again, very similar kind of ballpark kind of numbers in terms of yards per attempt. 10 for Lagway, only about 7 for Raiola. That's sort of the concern. But we talked about that in our last Nebraska video. A big part of that was just a hyper reliance on screens. We've got Dana Holgorsen coming in. He's going to open up the offense with some vertical stuff. So I expect Raiola's numbers in terms of yards per passing attempt to dramatically increase in 2025 and beyond. What does this all mean? Is that Raiola is still a physically gifted phenom he was coming into Nebraska, just like a DJ Lagway was to the Florida Gators. But for whatever reason, people have just totally forgot Dylan Raiola, that he's not getting nearly the attention the way a lot of these other younger quarterbacks are. And I think that's a big misguiding point here from the media, especially when you consider Nebraska has added a number of good receivers. Holgerson's going to be the OC, which is going to figure out a lot of the problems last year. And I think that's a good thing for Nebraska, totally honest, because right now they're kind of sliding under the radar. They aren't getting a lot of attention, a lot of buzz right now. But I'm expecting a massive leap in year 2 for Dylan Raiola. And again, when you look at his numbers, people thought DJ Lagway was already playing at all conference level. If you listen to anyone in Gainesville, anyone in the SEC, they're like, this kid's already doing elite stuff. But the numbers show that Raiola's at the same level, maybe better in some respects. And now that the roster is better around him, offensive strategy is going to be better around him, I'm expecting the offensive production and the win-loss column are going to dramatically improve with this young kid behind center heading into year 2. People talk about it all the time. It's a cliche, but it is true. The biggest leap you'll make at any level of football, college or pro, is from year 1 to year 2. And based on all reports, and you kind of highlighted there in your remarks, you're reporting there, is that Dylan Raiola is set up to have a really massive leap in year 2 going into a sophomore season, which would obviously be fantastic for Nebraska.
Yeah, no, yeah, and I think the comparison between Lagway and Raiola, I think that's a really apt comparison because I think these two guys, I I think they're similar, but I think Lagway burst onto the scene last year. I think Dylan Raiola, he's already on the scene, but I think people are going to start to notice him this year. Obviously, Florida, a big time school, they had some really nice playmakers last year, and compared to Nebraska, comparatively, I look at Nebraska's receiving room, it doesn't spark confidence, and a lot of these guys are already gone. Like a lot of these guys are moving on to bigger and better things. Their two top receivers last year were seniors, So, I mean, they're going to be gone. I think this is something that, what are you going to do? Like, how do you replace that? Well, you bring in a whole boatload of wide receiving talent. And I'll just go over the names. Dan Key, the headline of this class, Harley Gilmore, Cortez Mills, and then actually a really interesting freshman as well. He stood out in one-on-ones. Is that comparable? Is that translating so far to what you can do on the field in the big game? Maybe a little bit, but Isaiah Mosey has been really great so far in spring ball, as far as he's had some standout plays, some highlight real plays in one-on-ones, but let's wait to see how he does in, actual, full game, 7-on-7, something a little bit more substantial than one-on-ones with the corner. But I think we're already seeing a big time, transition in this wide receiver room, which I think that's a key here. Is when you look at a team like Nebraska, when you look at a quarterback like Dylan Raiola, it's great if you're a very highly touted prospect like Raiola was, but at some place when you have Jimmys and Joes all around you at the receiver room position, and you want to go on the field, it doesn't, really spark you. You start to lose interest. It can be kind of hard when you don't have weapons around you. But now you hear Raiola's comments. I've got Ferraris and Lamborghinis out in the field now. You can hear the excitement. You can hear, when you feel like you're surrounded. We say this all the time on this channel. A players want to play with A players. Raiola is an A player. We saw a year of his play. A lot of A players have now come into this program. We're starting to see the hype around Raiola. We're starting to see excitement from him. I think this is going to be a big change for him personally. Just when you're A player playing with B's and C's, it doesn't really spark confidence. It doesn't really make you want to get better. But now you've got guys around you like, I can do something with this room. I can do a lot more with the guys we have now than the guys we had then. I think that's a big key here, and I think that's why we're going to see such a big jump out of this Nebraska offense next season.
And I think it's a good indicator that Raiola notices that difference, right? Because one of the things that people forget about when you're a freshman or a young quarterback, really young position player anywhere, is that you're just kind of trying to keep your head above water, right? You're big time college football. It's madness. You're scrambling around, a lot of attention. You're just trying to figure things out, play to play on Saturdays, work through practice, work through films. It can be a lot of chaos. And one of the things that happens is that basically you kind of rely on the guys around you. And look, to be honest, the wide receiving room last year was not very good for Nebraska. I mean, not that the guys weren't trying hard or weren't good people. It's just they just weren't up to elite standards. And Raiola and I think all of college football can look at it now and say, yes, significantly better playmakers. And that'll make things a lot easier for Raiola heading into year two. Now that he's got some experience, now that he's got the whole season under his belt, he can kind of recognize, oh, I've got some good talent. And, I think the longtime commentator and analyst Phil Simms, he did a lot of things with NFL CBS stuff. I think he said it really smart one time. It's like, listen, a lot of people forget that the way you get a lot of receiving yards or passing yards and passing touchdowns is you throw a 10-yard slant to a good receiver and he takes it 60 from there, right? And that's so true. If you look at the best quarterbacks with these crazy numbers in college football, a lot of it isn't throwing it 80 yards downfield into triple coverage and just a perfect throw, right, a la Aaron Rodgers or Patrick Mahomes. A lot of it is just hitting a receiver who got open at 10 and he takes it 50 more, right? That's how you get a lot of big plays. And I think last year Nebraska had almost none of that. I think this year I'm expecting a lot more, especially with Holgorsen opening up the offense vertically and horizontally. I'm expecting these new receivers to have big numbers. I think Dan Key's going to have a career year, to be honest with you. I think I'm looking 60, 70, 80 catches, north of 1,000 yards. He's going to put up big numbers, but a lot of these guys I think are going to contribute. I think Cortez, to me personally, is a very interesting young kid that could become a big time weapon for Raiola. But regardless of who steps up to be Dylan's number one receiving target, I think one thing is especially clear. This is a different Dylan Raiola. This is a more mature, more experienced, and this is why you roll with the freshman quarterback. Let him figure it out. Let him go through those lumps. Let him overcome the adversity. Now, as you get ready for year two, he's been there, done that. He's ready to lead. He's ready to take on an additional responsibility. I think right now this Nebraska offense, and we covered it about a week ago, is trending better than it has since maybe 15 years, 20 years. The Nebraska fans, I tell you what, the way this passing game is looking, this is the best this team has looked maybe in the 21st century, as bonkers as that sounds, which is obviously a great sign for the future of this Cornhuskers program.